really feel the brunt of controversy. For instance, when I first started doing cervical medullary decompression for achondroplasia, let me translate. In dwarfs, the most common form of dwarfism, about 7% of those babies used to die spontaneously. It was really because their brain stems were being compressed by bone at the base of the skull. And when people would try to go in and fix it, it was so tight that they frequently had severe complications with either further neurological damage or death. And I remember being at the first international conference on human achondroplasia, and after the world experts and the geneticists that got up to speak, it came my turn. And I talked about this new technique we had developed for decompressing these children safely. And they were just outraged. They said, you neurosurgeons think you can do anything. You're the ones who kill these patients. If you just leave them alone, only 7% will die. You guys are horrible. It just went on. And I came back to Hopkins. I continued doing the operation anyway. And, there were complaints to the dean and to the president of the hospital and the departmental chairman. Carson's crazy. What's he doing all this stuff? And even the Maryland Medical Society, and it finally got up to the AMA. By that time, I had done enough cases that we were actually able to reveal the data. Not a single patient had died in a disease where 7% of them died if you didn't do anything. And the nice thing about medicine is data actually means something. And, people actually do things based on evidence. It's one of the reasons that we've gone in medicine from the last turn of the century, when the average age of death was 47, to now when the average age of death is about 80. And it's because of the tremendous advances that have been made, because people actually are able to inculcate the knowledge and the data into the making of decisions. Unfortunately, that doesn't work in politics. People really don't care what the data shows. They just sort of double down on their issues. For instance, you look at the war on poverty that started in the 60s with Johnson, the Great Society programs, and how that was going to eliminate poverty. And we spent $19 trillion in the effort. And what did we get for it? 10 times more people on food stamps, more poverty and welfare, crime, incarceration, out-of-wedlock births, broken families. Everything that was supposed to get better is not only worse, it's much worse. And what do people do in the political world? A lot of them, they look at that data and they say, we didn't do it enough. We need to do more of it. Well, that obviously is an asinine position. And that, unfortunately, has characterized so many of the things that have happened in our society. And that's one of the reasons that, I did feel that I needed to get into this. Wasn't particularly excited about it, but after the prayer breakfast in 2013, and so many people started clamoring for me to do it, and I kind of thought that was a ridiculous thing. I thought, like most people, you got to be a politician to do that. And nobody else could possibly solve any problems. But as I started really listening to people and noticing that the clamoring was getting louder and louder and broadening, traveling around the country, I was particularly touched by the number of elderly people who said to me that they were just waiting to die because they had given up on America. And now they felt maybe a little bit of encouragement. I heard that so many times. And then younger people who were so concerned about not only their future, but the future of their children. And what I've discovered is that a lot of people in our nation actually do have common sense and actually do have values and principles that are more traditional and that were the very ones that allowed this nation to rise from nowhere to the pinnacle of the world in record time. But they've become timid and afraid to express themselves. Because if you express yourself and your opinion is different than what the mainstream has put out, you're some kind of a bad person, a racist, a bigot, a homophobe. You're something. You're anti-woman. They will find some name to call you, to shame you, or you'll get an IRS audit, or your job will be messed with, or your family will be messed with. All kinds of things that have kind of discouraged people from really speaking out. And it's one of the reasons that I'm such a vociferous opponent of political correctness, because there were a lot of people who gave their fortunes and gave their lives so that we could have freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of religion in this country. And all of those things are gradually being eroded by political correctness. And as we give away our values and principles for political correctness, we're spiraling downward. We're not moving upward. And there are a lot of people who feel that. And I think really the issue is going to be, how do we get people to once again have the courage to stand up for what they believe in, to speak up for what they believe in, to engage in civil conversation, even if they disagree with each other about things. Because isn't that the way that you make progress? You don't make progress by getting into separate corners and hurling hand grenades at each other. And that's basically what we do now. You know, I'm always a little amused, you know, when I read an article and then I go to the comment section. You don't have to get more than 5 comments down before people start calling each other names and just acting like a bunch of third graders. Apologies to any third graders. I mean, it is really very sad to see what has happened in our society. And it's one of the things that I'm most concerned about in our nation, the divisiveness that has occurred. And, you know, the war on women, which doesn't exist, the racial wars, which don't exist, but which there are purveyors of division who will take any racial incident that involves people of 2 different races and try to make it into some kind of big deal, when in fact, if you put people together, they're going to have conflicts, period, end of story. And, you know, taking police officers who, like everybody else, will occasionally make a mistake. But plumbers make mistakes. Electricians make mistakes. Do we then go out and say, they're all bad? We should kill them? You know, put a target on their back? Come on. This kind of stuff makes absolutely no sense. But I think people are not really stopping to think about it and to analyze it. And why is it so dangerous? The class warfare, the religious warfare, the intergenerational warfare. Why is all that so important? Because we have radical jihadists who want to destroy us. And I think they're sitting there and they're weighing things. They say, should we destroy them? Or should we wait and let them destroy themselves? You know, that's probably a pretty tough choice for them. But, you know, we have got to be smarter than that. And we have got to stop fighting each other, recognize that we, the American people, are not each other's enemies. The enemies are those who are attempting to divide us. And unless we recognize that, they're going to be successful. Now, the other thing that I think is likely to destroy us is our incredible fiscal irresponsibility. I mean, it is beyond belief what we're doing. Thomas Jefferson said it is immoral to pass debt to the next generation. I mean, if he could see what we were doing, he'd have a seizure. I tell you, he would die right on the spot. He would not believe what was going on. I mean, we all talk about the $18.4 trillion national debt. And I'm not, you know, minimizing that. That is a lot of money that we're passing on to the next generation. If we tried to pay that back at a rate of $10 million a day, 365 days a year, you're talking over 5,000 years. And we're putting that on the back of our young people. But that's the good news, because it's actually much, much worse than that. The fiscal gap is what we need to be concerned about. Now, politicians will not talk about the fiscal gap because it is too frightening to talk about, and they know that perhaps they might be somewhat responsible for some of it. But since I'm not a politician, I can talk about it. And, what it is those fiscal liabilities that we have, unfunded liabilities going forward, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all the cabinet programs, all the money that is owed for those versus the revenues that can be expected from taxes and other sources. Now, those two numbers should be identical if you're fiscally responsible, or at least close to identical. And if they're not, a gap forms, a fiscal gap. Our fiscal gap right now sits at $211 trillion. That is an unimaginable amount of money. Now, the only reason we can sustain that level of debt is because we can print money. We're the reserve currency. And we're doing that in a very irresponsible way. What if we weren't a reserve currency and we had that level of debt and no way to hide it? What would happen then? I guarantee you, if Greece had the ability to print money, they would continue to do so. They would be in just as much trouble, if not more, than they're in now. They just wouldn't know it. And they'd be just going along and merrily having fun and breaking plates and what have you. But, we are in that situation on steroids. And, the position of reserve currency generally goes with the number one economy in the world, which we were from the 1870s until last year when we got passed up by China. They can't be the reserve currency for one reason. Their banking system is in shambles. And I hate to wish anything bad on anybody, but we are so lucky that their banking system is in shambles. But some of you who probably know the financial markets know that there's something called the Asian International Investment Bank, which China infused with $100 billion last week, and which some of our other allies are getting involved in. It'll take a few years for it to all shore up. But they're already making noises about the U.S. dollar not being the reserve currency. And what are we doing? Continuing to expand our deficits. This is a very dangerous situation. And I got to tell you, if I were in charge and I wanted to destroy America, you know what I would do? I would create division among the people in every way that I possibly could. Gender, race, income, religion, age, every division I could make, I would drive a wedge in. And I would have the people at each other's throats. And then I would drive the debt to a level that is unimaginable and clearly unsustainable and unsupportable. And then I would deteriorate the military while our enemies were growing. Now, that's what I would do. I'm not saying anything about anybody else, okay? If there are any coincidences to what's going on now, purely coincidental. But think about these things. We have to think about what is going on because our country was designed with the people at the pinnacle. It was designed of, for, and by the people. The government was there to facilitate life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for the people, not to rule them. And that's one of the reasons that I'm such a strenuous opponent of Affordable Care Act. Not because I don't want people to have good health care, just the opposite. I want them to have excellent health care, and I want everybody to have it. But the reason that I'm such a strenuous opponent of it is because it turns the whole concept of a nation of, for, and by the people on its head. And you have a government now saying, don't care what you people think. This is what we're doing. We're shoving it down your throats, and if you don't like it, too bad. That is antithetical to all the founding principles of this nation. And if we, the people, accept it, it will not be the end. And they will continue to do such things. That coupled with some of the deleterious effects of that act, for instance, the employer mandate, what has that done to the spirit of America? It used to be when you started a business, you were so excited, and you called your mom up and you said, Mom, I started my own business. I got 10 employees. You were excited. And the next year you had 20, and then 30, and then 40. Now, better stop. Don't want to hit 50 because it kicks in. All of a sudden, big, big, big consequences. For the very spine of the American economy, small business, we are putting that kind of damper on it. There is no excuse for a policy that depresses the development of something that is responsible for 60% of all jobs in America. These things are being foisted on us, and the average person is more interested in who's on Dancing with the Stars or who's playing soccer. This is a problem. It's a huge problem for us, and we have to deal with it. And we can deal with it. For instance, in terms of health care, there are logical solutions that don't require someone else to control our health care. And that's why I've advocated for health savings accounts. From the day you're born until the day you die, and you can pass it on at the time of death. We use the same dollars to pay for it that we use to take care of routine health care now. And the interesting thing is you give people the ability to shift money in their health savings accounts within their family. So let's say dad is $500 short for a special scan. His wife can give it to him, his sister, his uncle, his grandfather, anybody in the family. Makes every family essentially their own insurance company. It gives you enormous flexibility to cover virtually anything that goes on. It also makes you concerned about each other. If Uncle Joe is smoking like a chimney, everybody's going to say, Uncle Joe, put that cigarette down, because it's affecting all of us. Come on, guy, let's be reasonable here. And but also, the cost of your catastrophic insurance drops precipitously, because 80+% of your encounters with the healthcare system is going to come through your HSA. So that's like having a homeowner's policy with a large deductible, which is a very different animal than a homeowner's policy where you want everything covered. And if you can buy that insurance across state lines, voila, another whole level of savings by introducing free market concepts. Now, that takes care of the majority of people. But the logical question is, what about the indigent? How are you going to take care of them? They're not working. There's no good mechanism for funding their HSA. Well, how do we fund it now? Medicaid. Annual Medicaid budget, $400 to $500 billion a year. How many people participate? A quarter of the population, 80 million people. 80 million to 400 billion goes 5,000 times. $5,000 for each man, woman, and child on Medicaid. What could you buy with that? Concierge or boutique practices cost on the average of $2,000 to $3,000 a year. So they can all be in a boutique practice. And you still have a couple $1,000s left over to buy catastrophic insurance, which is much cheaper. Now, I'm not saying that that's what we should do. I'm saying that there's enough money to do that. I think if we could fashion a reasonable program for them, it would work much better than what we're doing now. And some people in Washington, their automatic response is, poor people would not have the ability to manage a health savings account. I guarantee you that that's what they would say, because they think they're stupid. And they think they're all like them. But they're not. You know, the fact of the matter is, you know, they said that about food stamps too. They said they wouldn't be able to manage them. They would go out and buy porterhouse steak the first 5 days. Day 6, they'd be on the corner begging for food. Did that happen? No. They learned to buy rice and beans and corn and hamburger helper and to make it last throughout the month. And they will learn how to use health savings accounts. We have to simplify health savings accounts, make them just like your bank account with not a whole bunch of bureaucrats involved in it, but that's easy enough to do. And, you know, here's the wonderful thing. Joe has a diabetic foot ulcer. He's going to learn very quickly not to go to the emergency room to get it taken care of, where it costs 5 times more than it would in the clinic. He's going to go to the clinic where not only do they take care of it, but they say, now, Joe, let's get your diabetes under control so you're not back here in 3 weeks with another problem. A whole nother level of savings begins to be achieved. And we start looking at preventive measures for health care, because chronic disease, particularly amongst the underserved, cost us enormous amounts of money. And if we have a much better mechanism of taking care of it, that's going to achieve a lot for us as a society. And also, any programs that we advocate, they should be things that move people toward personal responsibility and self-reliance, not toward dependency. That should always be our measuring stick for how we do things. By the same token, you know, when it comes to our economy, recognize that we have the most powerful, dynamic economic engine the world has ever seen in this country. That's what propelled us so quickly to the pinnacle of the world. We had an environment that encouraged entrepreneurial risk-taking and capital investment. That does not exist anymore. Now, there's trillions of dollars on the sideline. Nobody's too anxious to pour it into a system where you don't know what's going to happen. We've got to bring some stability back. We've got to get rid of the enormous amount of regulatory oversight. Now, this is America. This is not Cuba or Russia. This is America, where people are allowed to do things on their own, with a government there to facilitate, as I said before, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, not to manage every aspect of our lives. Now, this is not to say that I'm anti-government. This is not to say that I'm anti-regulation. Regulations are necessary. Our founders said no government or regulation would be necessary if men were angels. But men are not angels. Neither are women, and they knew that. Therefore, we have to have the appropriate number of regulations in place to deal with greed and taking advantage of other people. But we've gone way beyond that point at this stage of the game. I was speaking to the American Bakers Association at their annual convention a few months ago, and I asked the leadership, are you guys having any problem with excessive regulation? And they just had a big belly laugh. They said, that's all we've been talking about in this conference. It's affecting virtually every aspect of our society, and it doesn't need to. And then the other thing that is really cramping our style is the taxation system. It is an absurd taxation system, 80,000 pages of tax regulations. It's ridiculous. And, you know, what I've advocated is something very simple, very proportional. And I get my ideal from the Bible, I will admit. Seems like God's a pretty fair person. And, you know, he asked for a tithe. He didn't say if your crops fail, don't give me any tithe. He didn't say if you have a bumper crop, give me triple tithe. He wanted everything proportional. You make $10 billion, you pay $1 billion. You make $10, you pay $1. And you get the same rights and privileges. What could be more fair than that? The difference is you also have to get rid of all the loopholes and deductions. Now, some people, they get alarmed when they hear that. They say, but my mortgage deduction, I can't make it without my mortgage deduction. They haven't thought this through, because the amount of money you're saving is much greater than your mortgage deduction. And there's some who say, well, charitable deductions will disappear. The churches will all vanish. Do they know anything about American history? Do they realize that people gave just as much before 1913 when federal income tax was imposed as they did before? Do people actually realize the generous nature of Americans? Do people know that America was the impetus for socialism? You see, the Europeans, they looked over here and they saw the Fords and the Kellogg's, Carnegie's, Mellons, Vanderbilts, Rockefellers. They said, those people have too much money. And then there's everybody else. You can't run a government like that. You have to have an overarching government that receives all the funds and then equitably redistributes it. Have you ever heard that before? You know, that's what's known as socialism. But what they didn't know about those Americans that I just named, and many others like them, is that unlike the robber barons of Europe, who just gathered money into themselves and passed it down from generation to generation, they built the infrastructure of our country, the transcontinental railroad, the seaports, the textile mills, the factories, the mechanism to develop the most dynamic and powerful middle class the world has ever seen, which rapidly propelled us to the pinnacle of the world. That is where the strength is in our middle class, which is being decimated by many of our policies today. This is what we have got to begin to think about if we're ever going to solve this problem. And, you know, I can go on for a long time talking about financial policy, and maybe somebody has some questions on that, which I'm very happy to answer. I'm happy to answer any questions on foreign policy. A lot of people say, but you're a neurosurgeon. You couldn't possibly know anything about foreign policy. You know, what imbeciles to say something like that. Because if you have a brain and you have the ability to talk to people and you have the ability to listen and you have the ability to read, you can learn stuff, believe me. And I just find it pretty fascinating, particularly the people who come to me and they say, well, I mean, how can you even be thinking about politics? You're a doctor. I mean, a neurosurgeon. I mean, what if I decide that I want to go into the operating room and become a neurosurgeon? I can't do that. Well, they're right about that. They can't. But the fact of the matter is, it demonstrates, that question demonstrates very little understanding of the complexity of something like neurosurgery. You have to know an incredible amount, not just concepts, but details about a gazillion different things. That's why it takes so long. And I got to tell you, I can take somebody off the street who's very smart, and I can very quickly fill them in on a lot of major concepts, particularly if they're wise and if they're smart. And that's what the founders of our nation understood. And that's why they created a government and a constitution that could be handled by citizen statesmen, people who were intelligent, who were able to gather information, but it was not designed, quite frankly, for a political class. And if all it required was political experience, there are a lot of people who've been in Washington for decades whose name I could give, but I'm going to be kind. I don't think you would really want them to tie your shoe. I mean, it requires more than that. And, you know, there are lots of people in our country, quite frankly, that I have met in all kinds of fields who I would feel much more comfortable making decisions for me than some of the people that I see in Washington, D.C. Now, it's not to say that all of them are bad. Some of them are good people with good intentions. But my point being, that is not the only mechanism that can give you wisdom, experience, and the ability to solve problems. Having said that, let me open it up for questions.
So we do have time for a few questions. Barry from AARP, you want to lead off?
Afternoon, Dr. Carson. Welcome to New England. Hope we gave you some good weather here.
Oh, it's terrific.
One of the things, if you look in the future, questions from AARP about Social Security. If things go on as they're going on, the current status quo, we're going to run out of money in Social Security in about 17 or 18 years.
Correct.
What specific things do you have in mind that you would like to put forward to correct that
Okay.
for our kids and grandkids?
Thank you for asking that question. Something that I've thought about carefully. And there's no question that it looks like a Ponzi scheme right now. But we can fix it. There are about 20% of Americans who could easily, I mean very easily, get by without their Social Security checks. Many people like that in this room. What I would propose is that we allow people to opt out of receiving their Social Security payments in lieu of a tax credit. They get the tax credit. They don't get a check, but they get the tax credit. So they still get the benefit of it without us having to go into the pot, which is already severely strained. And I predict that about 20% of people would take advantage of that. If that is true, then that would automatically stabilize the system, which now gives us time to begin to gradually increase the age of retirement. Remembering, when we put that system into place, the average age of death was 63. And now we're looking at 80, and we have not made any adjustments. It's unfair to make adjustments, I believe, to people who are 55 years or older, because they don't have enough time to do what needs to be done. But for people who are younger than that, I think there is time. And it's a gradual adjustment. Many of the people that I've talked to said we don't have to do anything radical like they did in Italy, because they moved their age up tremendously and cut the benefits by 40% in order to get back in line. But the longer we wait, the more drastic the need will be to do it. We do it very gradually over the course of about 25 or 30 years, and we can sustain the system. Not only that, but remember, once we have intelligent people dealing with our economic issues, there's going to be money. Keep in mind that our economy grew at an average rate of 3.3% from 1850 until 2000. From 2001 to 2014, it grew at a rate of 1.8%. The last quarter, it was actually negative growth. You know, the things that we have in place are not conducive to growth. You get the right policies in there, and you put make a friendly environment for business again, America will take off again, because we're full of people who are creative and who are hardworking and who will make the opportunities. And when that happens, you know, the doors will open up for many of the people that Romney characterized as the 47%. I can tell you a lot of those people are hardworking people who believe in America. All they want is an opportunity.
Other questions? Ted Corson.
Dr. Carson, welcome to New Hampshire.
Thank you.
That you're here. My question is, there was an unfortunate incident in San Francisco over the last couple of days where a young lady was shot by an illegal who was deported over 5 times.
Right.
My question is a two-pronged question. Number one, what would be President Carson's plan in terms of dealing with immigration? And the second part of that is, how will you deal with these cities who are becoming sanctuary cities and violating the federal law, which was passed by President Clinton?
Okay, well, the second part is easy. No sanctuary cities. I think that's ridiculous. You know, I spoke at the National Association for Latino Elected and Appointed Officials a few weeks ago in Las Vegas. I was the only candidate who would dare venture into that environment. And I told them, I'm going to tell you the same thing that I tell everybody else. Now, of course, they wanted me to say, we're going to make everybody here citizens and everything's going to be great, and you can, but I'm not going to say that. Do we have an illegal immigration problem? Absolutely, we have an illegal immigration problem. All of this stuff about Trump, you know, what we really should be talking about is how do we solve the illegal immigration problem, not, you know, the words that Donald Trump used, which were perhaps a little inflammatory. I learned that several months ago to tone my rhetoric down so that people could actually hear what I'm saying, because there were some people who they just focus on the word and they can't hear a word you're saying. So that's why you haven't heard me doing that much lately, because I want people to hear what I'm saying. In order to fix the illegal immigration problem, you have to seal the borders, all of the borders, not just the southern borders, north, south, east, west, oceanic borders, which is doable. with, electronic devices, drones, a whole host of things. Not just talking about fences and walls. That's old school. That's part one. Part two is you have to turn off the spigot that dispenses the goodies. If there's nothing for them to come here for, they're not going to risk trying to get in here. I think that will stop the flow. Now, you still got 11 plus million people. What are you going to do with them? Some of them don't know any other place. It's the only place they know. I would provide an opportunity for them to become guest workers. They have to get registered. They have to enroll in a back tax program. They have to pay their taxes going forward. But now they don't have to live in the shadows, and we don't decimate the farming industry. That's very important to do both of those things. Now, the other part of this is, we send out billions of dollars a year in foreign aid, sometimes to countries that don't like us very much, trying to buy their friendship. Guess what? We don't have billions of dollars to send out to anybody anymore. We've got these enormous debts. We can't keep ballooning this deficit. So, however, if you look, a great example, you look in the country of Cameroon in Africa right now. Some American companies have gone over there to help develop their millions of acres of incredibly fertile land. And they're coming back with booming crops, and they're making great profits off of them, our companies. But at the same time, they're improving the economy in Cameroon. They're improving the infrastructure there. They're making jobs there. They're teaching those people ag techniques. And it's fantastic. It's a win-win situation. That's exactly what we should be doing in Honduras and El Salvador and Mexico, letting our companies, facilitating them going over there, not giving taxpayer money, and let our companies, through their ingenuity, make money over there and help develop those infrastructures so that those people don't feel a need to come here. And that would be more consistent with the character of America.
Hi, Doctor.
Hi.
Tom Horgan, New Hampshire College and University Council. The New England Council just released a report saying that the business community can't find skilled workers that it needs, and the administration just came out and said we should have free community college with a $65 billion investment. I'm wondering your thoughts about access to higher education.
Well, first of all, poor people in our country can already go to community college on Pell Grants. It already exists, has existed for a long period of time. People who are not poor can also go to community college, but it's a four-letter word, what they need to do. It's called work. And it worked for a long time, and it still works today. We don't have to be giving them something. They can work for it. And I'm not so sure that even poor people can't work for it, but there's already a mechanism that exists for that. It's not to say that I don't think education is important. Education is vital. But it can't be the same thing for everybody. We have to have a variety of mechanisms for people to get education in. We also have to recognize that there's a real problem with our colleges and universities right now. The escalating tuitions. I mean, it is going crazy. And kids are coming out of school with debts that are just ridiculous. And, the universities know that you accept a kid, they can get a government loan. But those loan rates are not 3, 2, and 1%. There's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8%. And that accumulates very rapidly. So what I would suggest is we make the colleges and universities responsible for the interest. I think you would see a huge change in a hurry. And they would begin to constrain their expenses. They would find other ways for kids to get money in terms of jobs that people used to have on university campuses. And they would make more grants available. And because we cannot continue to have that kind of escalation going on, it's untenable. And also, we need to reintroduce into high schools the kind of vocational training that will give us the plumbers, the electricians, who actually, in many cases, make more money than people who go to college. And we need to give people other options. We need to make all the options available. We need to take advantage of technology. We've fallen behind significantly, particularly in STEM areas. And, we have computer programs that can look at the way a kid solves, 5 algebra problems, and based on how they solve them or don't solve them, it knows what they know and what they don't know, and it can tutor them. The same thing a good algebra teacher can do, but the teacher can only do it for one student at a time. The computer program can do it for a whole classroom, a whole school, a whole city. And we also have the ability to have virtual classrooms where we can put the best teachers in front of 1 million students at a time instead of 30 students at a time. Those are the kind of things that make a difference. I also think maybe the Department of Education, which is way overbloated, 4,400 employees at an average compensation of $135,000, can tone that down a little bit. But one of the things we can make them responsible for is monitoring, particularly our institutions of higher education, for extreme political bias. And if it exists, let's cut out their federal funding. I think you'd see an exodus from those universities of all the radicals who don't believe in America. And I would monitor on both sides, right and left, because universities should be places where people can go and discuss everything and learn about everything. That's how we develop the kind of leaders that we need in this country, not ideologues.
One last question.
I see one back there. Hi.
As president, how would your administration deal with the relationship between environmental security, energy security, and economic security?
Excellent question. Environmental, economic security, energy security. First of all, this country has been blessed with enormous energy resources. I mean, it's unbelievable what we possess. But we're not able to use it as we should on a geopolitical scale because of these archaic energy exportation rules that were put in place in the 70s when we had an energy crisis. They're still in place. So all of our reservoirs are full. We have no place to go with it. And I believe the Environmental Protection Agency should not be abolished, but its mission should be changed to work with business, industry, and academia to find the cleanest, most environmentally friendly ways to develop our enormous energy sources. We have so much natural gas, it will last us for 1,000 years. And we have the ability to liquefy natural gas now, which means get rid of those energy exportation bans, we can export it. And we can make Europe dependent on us for energy and limit the influence of Vladimir Putin, who has great expansionist ideas. That's what we should be thinking about. How do we use it? And we can also use a lot of the revenues from that energy to work on renewable, clean energy sources. You know, we have a tendency to allow everything to become a battle. You know, fossil fuel versus green energy, and let's fight each other to the death. It doesn't have to be a fight. We can use one to expand the other because we will eventually need new energy sources. So let's do this in an intelligent way that doesn't damage us economically, that may actually help to drive down our national debt and at the same time help us on the whole geopolitical scale, doing things in a proactive way rather than always reacting to people. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.